Welcome to the Carly Collection Management Committee Weeding Webinar Series. This first webinar is an overview of weeding and everything that entails. We are very pleased to have Brian Diesel, Connie Lee, and Dr. Pamela Thomas presenting today. My introductions are in alphabetical order, but happens to be the reverse order of the presentations. Brian Diesel is a native of Illinois, born and raised in the Chicagoland area. He recently earned his MLIS from Dominican University last May with a certificate in Archives and Cultural Heritage. His bachelor's degree is in history and a minor in computer science. He has worked at Dominican University's Rebecca Crown Library for 2.5 years now. As a project assistant, he has been involved on a variety of projects, from creating clamshell boxes for special collections to maintaining and redesigning web pages for the library, as well as the collection development project that he will be sharing with you today. Outside of the library, he has been involved in the local music scene for over a decade, working as a tech and occasional tour manager for a number of local rock acts. That has allowed Brian the opportunity to travel around the country as well as in the UK. And if he's not at the library or a show, he's likely to be cooking or grilling outside, temperature notwithstanding. Connie Lee works in SHU Library at Illinois College in Jacksonville, Illinois. She has been working at SHU since January 1995, which, if you quickly do the math, is 19 years. She started as the acquisitions person and bookkeeper, and then was promoted to assistant systems administrator, while still being the acquisitions person and bookkeeper, when Illinois College joined Carly. When their systems administrator left, she became the systems administrator and iShare liaison. When their cataloger left last October and the position eliminated, Connie became technical services manager, which encompasses acquisitions, cataloging, system administration, and iShare liaison. Connie has an LTA degree from Illinois Central College, a bachelor's degree from McMurray College in Organizational Leadership, and a master's degree from Benedictine University at Springfield in Management of Organizational Behavior. Dr. Pamela Thomas has over 20 years of experience as a technical services librarian from public, special, and academic libraries. She has been the library technical assistant, the LTA program coordinator at Illinois Central College for the past 6 years, and the technical services librarian since 2002. She has served in the Collection Development Committee for 7 years. Pam has been teaching LTA courses for 10 years. She published her dissertation on the possible impact of voluntary accreditation standards on LTA programs. She was chair of the LTA Education Committee and currently serves as a member. Pam is the editor of the online publication Z687, Creating the Future of Technical Services. I will now turn the microphone over to our presenters. Our first speaker today is Dr. Pamela Thomas.
Good morning. I did a presentation. It's called Weeding and Overview. And let's go to the first slide. This just gives you a little more information. As Elizabeth already said, I work at Illinois Central College, but for the past 6 years, all the librarians here have been engaged in a focused weeding project, and we've removed 53,520 volumes in that time period. So, why should you weed? There are different reasons for wanting to weed. One of them is the lack of space. Also, you may want to update your editions. And then there's the condition of materials. And sometimes by weeding, you reveal the newer books on the shelf. And then there are also accreditation requirements. I'm going to expand on those points a little bit. For many libraries, weeding becomes a priority when there's literally no space left on the bookshelves. That is not a problem that we have at ICC. We have actually removed some of our shelving units. Sometimes updated editions of a book are available and there's no reason to retain the older edition. The condition of books can promote either replacement or weeding of materials. If a book is moldy or odorous, then it should be removed from the collection. When you weed older and usually unattractive books from the shelf, the newer books are revealed and it is easier for patrons to find what they are looking for. For programs and/or schools that are accredited, there are guidelines on the age of the materials in your collection. Okay, so before you weed, you really need to know your collection. So what is the focus of your collection? You need to know your collection and what you want your collection to represent. Are you a community college? Are you a four-year college? What types of degrees does your institution grant? What programs does your college offer? What new courses and/or programs have been added to your institution? Does your collection have materials to support these new courses and programs? You may need to create or update your collection development policy. If your library does not already have a collection development policy, then now is the time to create one. Many libraries have their collection development policies online, and you can certainly look at theirs for some samples. What will you collect? If your library already has a collection development policy, then it might be time to update it. Sorry, that goes with the other point, so that it reflects your policies on what you plan to collect and what your library will not collect, such as popular fiction, graphic novels, etc. So along with that, you also need to decide what you will collect and what you will not collect, and that should be documented in your collection development policy as well. Okay, community college weeding. I work at a community college, and that's where I have the most experience at weeding. We are not a research institution, therefore we do not have to collect historical books. I know that some of the other four-year colleges and universities do retain historical books, but that is one area where it's fairly easy for us to weed. We do not collect textbooks. I'm sure some other libraries do, but we don't. As part of our collection development policy states, we do not collect textbooks. There were various textbooks in our collection, so those were also easy to identify and weed. Your collection should support the curriculum. So our main focus is to purchase materials that focus on the curriculum. Some of our older printed materials do not support the curriculum, so those are also fairly easy to weed out. You need to have a formal weeding procedure. Here, we did not have one for many years, and it was not a priority. But however, once we agreed that our collection needed to be weeded, we started using the CREW guidelines for weeding. And you can just Google that. You should be able to find those fairly easily. And I gave you the link too for that. We also had an increase in our electronic materials with more of our courses going online and with more distance students. We began purchasing an increased number of electronic resources, so we do not feel the need to purchase as many print resources. Okay, you also need to make a decision whether you're going to replace, update, or weed. Some books simply get worn out and need to be replaced, much like a car battery. If there's a newer edition available, then that becomes an easy way to update the edition. Sometimes you will need to update the subject content of a book that is going to be weeded rather than replacing it with a newer edition, mostly because a newer edition is not available. Sometimes the best decision is to weed the book. It might be a textbook, have mold, or is in poor condition. These books might not need to be replaced or updated, especially if the content is outdated, incorrect, or biased, and you can simply remove it from your collection. We are on a 5-year weeding cycle, and it aligns with the ICCB, which is the Illinois Community College Board accreditation cycle. In some of the areas in our library, specifically U, which is military science, and V, naval science, we use the Library of Congress classification system, are not covered in the accreditation cycles. This can make weeding easier since these materials do not directly support the curriculum. Okay, there's sometimes a weeding workflow. We have, I believe, established a fairly good one here. We started out with appointing specific librarians to specific liaison areas. We have a collection development committee, so each member of that is a liaison to a specific committee. My areas are AIT, which is Agricultural and Industrial Technologies, and the English, Humanities, and Language Studies. For each fiscal year, we focus on specific areas of the 5-year weeding cycle. You might also need to run some reports. to look at your collection. And we run reports for each area that is being weeded for that year, and the spreadsheet is then given to that specific librarian to work with. We also like to work with faculty because we like to include them since they're the ones that are teaching these subjects and are usually better subject content experts than we are. But it's up to each librarian to contact the faculty member or members who teach those areas and decide how to weed the sections. Some librarians talk face-to-face with the faculty, some librarians communicate through email, some faculty members want to come in and look at the items, while others are okay with marking on a spreadsheet what materials should be kept and which ones can be weeded. Some faculty do not respond to phone calls or emails, so the librarian uses his or her best judgment and selects the items to weed. So once all of that's accomplished, then we are ready to begin the weeding process. So the materials are marked on a spreadsheet for weeding, and our circulation staff print it out and give it to our student workers to pull off the shelves and put on carts. Then the carts of books are brought to the technical services department where I work, and I begin weeding those. I mark on the spreadsheets if the item has been weeded simply by stating yes or no. Some books are not found, so they are marked as not pulled and are sent to the circulation staff to check the shelves again once the area has been completely weeded. This often works out well because then the books are a little more visible and they can be found, or sometimes they're just not found, so they're marked as lost in that case. Or missing, sorry, by the circulation staff. We send our books to Better World Books, and I provided the link there for you. So once I have weeded the cart of books, I give the books to student workers who stamp withdrawn on the inside cover of the book, and then they're boxed up and sent to Better World Books. I simply print out this shipping label from their portal. I tape the printed label to the boxes, and our delivery staff take the boxes down to our shipping dock. However, if they are medical or legal books, I have the student workers cut the pages from the cover and recycle the books because that material is usually outdated and could be potentially harmful. Well, the medical more than the legal. And we cannot sell our books because we're a not-for-profit educational institution, so we use Better World Books for that, and they could make a profit, but we can't. Okay. This brings me to the last copy project that Carly has. I delete the item record, the holdings record, and the bibliographic record from Voyager, and then I copy and paste the OCLC number from the bib record into the OCLC search box and delete the holdings. I check to see if there are holdings in my state. If there are no holdings by Carly member libraries, then I fill out the last copy form, put them on a special shelf in my office, and wait to hear back from Elizabeth Claridge. If Elizabeth wants me to send the books to U of I, then I give the books with the printout to our interlibrary loan librarian, and she sends the books through the delivery system. So they're deleted from Voyager, then from OCLC, and then they are sent to U of I if they want the last copy. And the form's really easy to fill out if you haven't done that yet. Okay, that's it. If you have any questions, please send them in and we will answer those at the end of the webinar. Thanks for listening.
We may still be having some technical difficulties with Connie. I just want to remind Pam that to mute her microphone right now, and to Connie that she needs to unmute if she can hear me. Ah, success. Thank you.
Okay, I'm here. My name is Connie Lee, and I am the Technical Services Manager at Illinois College. And we did not have a formal weeding process. The only time that books were withdrawn from the catalog were when they were lost, which meant students didn't return them, or they were damaged. And the damaged books were found only during the check-in, check-out process. We didn't really look at the collection. As you can see, this is a look at just a piece of our stacks where we don't have any room. We've got books that are sitting on top of the shelves because there's not room to put them where they belong. We hired a new director in 2012, and he did an analysis of the collection. And we had a 65% fill rate, which would mean that weeding really probably wasn't necessary. But there were hot spots in the 300s, 800s, and 900s that would require major shifting to get all the books in. So we decided to do some weeding. Our new director had to prepare a weeding philosophy, and he decided that materials that no longer meet the evaluative selection criteria will be removed from the collection, and those would be damaged or worn books, places where we need space, user needs and surveys, and circulation counts. We also need to look at the books that we have and look at what we're buying for educational objectives, enrichment and support of the curriculum, reading interest and level, permanent or timely value, competence and authority, accuracy of information, readability, price, local resources, interest of patrons, historical value, and technical and artistic quality. We reduced our print and microfilm journal holdings by removing any titles that were available from JSTOR, Project Muse, or directly from the publisher in PDF format. We still want the look and feel of the print, so we really wanted the PDF. We withdrew some older titles if they were in the Hathi Trust, but the criteria for that was that they all had to be in one record. We didn't want the holdings over multiple records, and they had to be in a run. It didn't necessarily have to be all that we had, but it had to be like from the start of what we had to a midpoint, or from a midpoint to the end. We didn't want to take out pieces in the middle. And if we had titles that were overlapping between print and microfilm, we removed the microfilm. This is a picture of a section of my spreadsheet that we use to track everything. You can see the print and the microfilm coverage, and we looked up each title in EBSCO's A to Z list and recorded where full-text PDF was available. And we also recorded what was available through the Hathi Trust, and we then withdrew the print of the microfilm based on the online holdings. The faculty review shelves are where we put the books for faculty review. It is immediately to the left of the front door where it's visible and easily seen, and these shelves hold approximately 500 books. The director removes the books from the stacks and places them on the faculty review shelves and notifies the faculty of the call number range that's currently on the shelves. We started with a 1-week review process, and the faculty responded that wasn't long enough. We extended it to 2 weeks and finally settled on a 4-week review period. The selected books are then placed on a purple truck. We chose the purple truck because it's a distinctive color and we only have one in that color. Our reference librarian chooses the books that have general interest and are on subject matters used by students in other classes. Like the faculty choose books that are in their interest area or things that they think they might be teaching, but sometimes students use books in that call number area for speeches or papers for composition, and our reference librarian is the person who sees that. Also, he chooses things on local interest and things that are authored by faculty members who may no longer be here that the current faculty may not know was a faculty member. We are not a research library, and therefore our director believes we don't need to keep books that are older in the collection unless they're currently being used. He set a publishing and a purchasing date of 5 years and a checkout criteria of the last 2 years. But this was changed to a 6-year window for everything when the faculty mentioned there were some classes that are taught only once every 4 years. We also have books that are purchased by 2 Illinois state grants, the African Diaspora Grant and the LSTA Grant, and there was no criteria in the grant on how long we had to keep those books, so we assume we have to keep them forever. So we check for those as well, and we check those by looking either in the muff head of the cataloging record or looking in the front of the book where there is a book plate. We also, if we have more than one copy, we withdraw the second copy, and we look at browses. And if there's more than 5 browses, then we keep the book. And if there's 3 times more checkouts, or if it's 3 times, the browsers are 3 times more than the checkouts or 6 more than the checkouts, then we keep the book. This is the query that Carly wrote for me, and it's just great. I asked them to take the titles by call number in a specific location and add circulation information to it for weeding purposes. And I really didn't tell them everything that I wanted. I just gave them a broad idea, and they put in what they thought I needed and sent it to me, and it was far more than I would have ever asked for, but I have used all of it. I run the query, designating the location and the call number range of the books I want. I export it to Excel, and I start sorting it against the weeding criteria. The books that are kept after applying the criteria are then shelved. And I actually run this query when the books first go on the faculty review shelves, and as the purple truck gets full, I take the books off and mark them on the spreadsheet that we're keeping them, and I go ahead and shelve them then. This is a picture of a piece of my spreadsheet. You can see I've color-coded for different types of books. The blue is for the things the faculty have chosen. The green is for what our reference librarian has chosen. The purple is our library criteria. As I prepare to withdraw the remaining books, I check them against the spreadsheet to make sure all the books are accounted for. If I have any books that haven't been noted as kept, but I don't have on the shelf, then I mark them as missing in the catalog for future lookup. And then I look the book up in cataloging. I get the OCLC number and paste it into the OCLC window and look at it in OCLC. And then I check the holdings in OCLC, and if we are the only library in Illinois that has the book, then I go to iShare and I check to see if it's in iShare, because as we know, OCLC has many records for the same book. So just because it's not on, nobody else has it on my record doesn't mean that nobody else has it. And if I find that other people have it, I go ahead and I withdraw the book in OCLC and I withdraw it in the catalog. If I find that nobody else has it, then I do the Last Book in Illinois project and send it to Carly. These are the notices that Carly sends back. The first time I did it, I did not check iShare, and I got this more than one Illinois copy found in iShare, please do not send. So they let you know if you didn't do it properly. The second one says please route to UIUC for processing, and that's what they send you when it's the only book. I have not yet sent them a book that was the only copy that they have rejected. And then I would withdraw the book afterwards. So I would remove the items, and if it's attached to a purchase order and I am unable to remove it, I would suppress the bib record, put a note in the a private note in the muff head, unable to delete, attached to PO, and then remove the holdings from OCLC and delete the bib record. This is a picture of our workflow that our previous cataloger had drawn up, showing that where we would look and how our workflow would work. If there's any questions, we will take questions at the end, and Brian is up next.
Good morning. Well, first off, I'd like to thank Connie and Dr. Thomas for their wonderful presentations. And I'd also like to thank Jen and Elizabeth at Carly for hosting this webinar and for having me. Anyway, by way of introducing myself, my name is Brian DeZiel, and I'm a project assistant at Dominican University's Rebecca Crown Library in River Forest. And this morning I'm going to discuss one of the projects that I've been working on for the past few months. I should probably start off by letting you know that the project I've been working on has not been a traditional weeding project. The biggest difference being that I was not involved in the original separation of the materials from the collection, but rather I was tasked with addressing a mixture of items that had fallen through the cracks during previous projects. But that being said, I'm happy to share my experiences with you today in hopes that it can shed some light on how to deal with situations where traditional weeding processes may not be an option. The materials that I've been responsible for addressing have been almost entirely library science materials that are at least 20 years old, and a majority of them actually being much older than that, up to 70, 80, or even 100 years old. As I mentioned, these were the byproducts of a variety of different projects that had occurred in the past that included inventories, as well as a project in which a separate library science reference collection was incorporated into our main collection. During the course of these activities, a number of items had been pulled from the collection for a variety of reasons. They may have been pulled because they were duplicate, triplicate, or a number of other superfluous copies of an item. They had obvious cataloging errors, or because they lacked a barcode and or were not represented in our catalog. And these are the items that were set aside and ultimately fell through the cracks to me. Because of the residual nature of this assortment of materials, I had to deal with a number of challenges right from the get-go. The first and foremost was, quite bluntly, what are these items? There was no original documentation as to what they were, what project they had come from, why, or even when they had been pulled from the shelves. This was complicated by the fact that there had been prior attempts to address these items which had gone unfinished and had left some incomplete and inconsistent notes. Secondly was, what is the status of each of these items? Are they duplicates? Are they in our catalog? Sort of trying to get back to why were they pulled from the collection in the first place. And then finally, what criteria should be used to determine if we retain the item or not? This was particularly tricky because even though we have a detailed collection development policy, that policy is currently in transition. It's currently being updated. And just as significantly, there was a lack of statistics regarding the use of these items. As I wound up discovering, almost 1/3 of the items were not represented in our catalog whatsoever. So we had absolutely no statistics as to their usage. And the remaining items that were in our catalog had been sitting on a shelf and that was inaccessible to our patrons for an indeterminate amount of time, but at least a few years. So any statistics we might have would not only be out of date, but wouldn't accommodate for any possible usage of the item during the time that it was sitting on the shelf and not accessible to our patrons. So with the help of, and actually under the supervision of our public services librarian and library science bibliographer, we developed a system to address these challenges. And our first step was actually to divide these items into distinct manageable units. And this was done primarily for practical reasons. There were approximately 600 to 700 items, and the public services librarian and I were the only people working on the project. And this was not the only project that I have been working on. So just to keep the project manageable, we separated the items into 6 units. And I should add that this also helped to stagger the process of the work so that if work on one unit got stalled, work could continue with the others. The first units were those that were already physically separate and apparent. For instance, we had a cart of items that we knew to be duplicates, so that became one unit. Another was a shelf of items we knew had come from the former library science reference collection, and that became another unit. The next units were created from topics that were well represented among the items. So we had a number of items that related to children's literature. Another topic that was well represented was school media centers. And we also had a number of cataloging materials, and each of these became their own units. And then finally, the remaining items were items that had been left over from prior inventories. Once the units were separated, I created a list in Excel that included very basic bibliographic and holdings information on the items. Basically, the title, the author, year of publication, call number, and then sometimes the ISBN and barcode. And then the second step after that was to check for the items in our catalog, which was recorded on the Excel sheet. And then once this was done, it was necessary to physically check for the item in the stacks, which actually in some cases meant checking up to as many as 4 places: our main collection, reference collection, and then less frequently our juvenile collection and government documents collection. Now, while this might seem a bit redundant and time-consuming at first, it actually proved to be one of the most important parts of the process. It actually allowed me to learn much more about the item and how it related to the rest of our collection than simply checking the catalog record alone. Among the frequent discoveries that I made by doing this, would I discover additional copies or other editions. In one case, I found 8 other copies of an item. Conflicts with the catalog, which most frequently meant items that appeared in our catalog in one place, say in our reference collection, were actually shelved in the main stacks. And then discovering complete or incomplete series. And what I mean by this is that I might have one volume of a set that's not represented in our catalog, but by checking the stacks, I would discover that we did indeed have the remainder of the set. Once searching of the stacks was completed, the final part of this inventory and status portion of the process was to determine the number of holdings in iShare and WorldCat before moving on to the reappraisal process. Our reappraisal process began first by reaching out to faculty in our Graduate School of Library and Information Science. Those topics that were well represented in the materials, the Children's Lit, the school media centers, and cataloging, were gone over with faculty members who specialized in that field. And this was actually tremendously helpful in determining the historical and research significance of a number of the, particularly the older items. And then all the materials were reviewed by myself and the library science bibliographer on an item-by-item basis. And while each item posed its own unique challenges, we focused on the following criteria to reappraise the items, which were the significance and currency of the item, the historical importance of the item, the number of copies in our library, as well as the number of copies in iShare and WorldCat, recommendation from the graduate school faculty, if applicable, the physical condition of the item, and then, of course, the mission of the library and the original collection development policy. I should note that some items did wind up requiring further research or consultation with GSLIS faculty. These were set aside until the relevant information could be obtained, and then they went through the whole process again. Items that we decided to keep or to keep the best copy of were sent to cataloging or to be reshelved as necessary. And all other items moved on to the deaccession part of the process. Now, whereas the previous steps differed, the deaccession process we followed was probably the closest or most similar to that of a traditional weeding process, or the portion thereof. The process began with a brief final review of the items, and this was primarily to catch items that should be retained or reviewed so that nothing else fell through the cracks. And then to make sure that in cases where we decided to keep only one of multiple copies, that we were indeed keeping the best copy. Based on the number of copies in iShare and WorldCat, items that were eligible for the last copy project were submitted to UIUC. And I'd also like to highlight that in a couple of cases we had items that were represented in iShare and WorldCat, but appear to be of institutional significance to libraries outside of Illinois, to which we offered those items. Then I removed the record from our catalog and from WorldCat, which was interesting because sometimes the record was in one and not the other. And then some titles that fit within the personal research interests of the graduate school faculty were offered to them for personal use. And then the remaining items followed our normal disposal procedure, which is that depending on the content and condition of the item, they were offered to Better World Books, placed on our giveaway table, recycled, or disposed of. And that was the general process that we followed for this project. And although I've kind of neatly laid it out in a few steps here, often multiple were occurring simultaneously. And additionally, there were a couple other factors that had to be taken into account that required cross-departmental communication that I want to briefly touch on. The first was the appearance of many government documents among the items we were going through. This is particularly significant because Dominican is a selective depository in the Federal Depository Library Program. Excuse me. Which means that these items are subject to a separate retention schedule and deaccession process. Additionally, there's been a government documents weeding project that has been running concurrent that's been ongoing during the course of this project. And this required constant communication with the government documents librarian, as well as anyone working on the government documents project to determine whether they should deaccess an item or whether we could. Another factor that was critical to keep an eye out for were items of local, historical, or financial value. As we are a Dominican institution, it was very important to keep on the lookout for anything belonging or pertaining to the Dominican order or any of the Dominican sisters, including former donations by Dominican sisters. Also, we've had a library school for over 80 years, and therefore I had to keep an eye out for any materials that had been published by former faculty members. And both of these types of materials needed to be looked over by our archivist before we could do anything with them. And on that note, actually, the archive's collection policy was something that was really important to keep in mind because it dictates that we keep almost anything that pertains to Dominican University or Rosary College, the predecessor institution. And it was important because many of these materials did date to the earlier years of the university. And finally, and unfortunately, it became necessary to look for items that may be at risk for theft or vandalization due to their financial value. Unfortunately, I did discover that a number of volumes of a 1930s serial, of which we had a complete run, had been vandalized for original works of art that had been included in various volumes. And so the entire run was immediately moved to special collections. However, I make note of it because unfortunately it goes to show that it can happen anywhere and to anyone. Well, I'm proud to say that after a number of months, we are nearing the completion of this project. And so I just want to share a few reflections with you. The first being the importance of communication. Successful completion of this project would not be possible without the assistance of the graduate school faculty, government documents, archives, and really to some extent, almost everyone in the library. Communication can really help to ensure that you are doing the most to find the best home for an item before getting rid of it. Another thing is keeping a broad perspective even when focusing on a narrow subject. So in my case, this was older and frequently out-of-date library science materials. However, I routinely asked myself, how might this still be useful and who might this interest outside the library field? For instance, a Dow Jones database user guide from the early 80s may no longer be relevant as a technical manual. However, instruction librarians might use it to show how search strategies haven't changed in 30 years, or computer science historians might look at it to study early database user interfaces. And this kind of theory also relates to archives, keeping in good communication with archives, government documents, and keeping other departments within the library in mind. And the importance of documentation. As I mentioned, there was no I received no documentation regarding these items when I began working with them. And documentation may have actually simplified or eliminated some of the challenges I originally faced. Keeping a good record during collection development projects, I believe, it allows you to keep track of the progress of the various items, but also, and maybe more importantly, it'll help you to document the process itself, so that in the future, should you choose to undertake a similar project, or should you be faced with another scenario like this one that's a little out of the ordinary, you can refer back to the process, and you can replicate it or adapt it. Leaving a more accessible collection and catalog. This is something that reminds me, when I was a kid and we would go on family vacations where we would rent a cottage or we'd visit my grandparents' cabin, my mother always taught me that you should leave the place cleaner than when you found it. And I think this is something that's applicable to almost any collection development project, and that the goal is to leave a catalog and a collection that is more accessible than when you started. which leads me to a phrase that's been bouncing around in my head since I began with this project, and I think directly reflects that philosophy, which is that we inherit the legacies of all those that went before us. Anyway, that concludes my portion of the webinar. I'd like to thank you all for your time and attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I'll see that one of the questions that was asked during the session was during Connie's presentation. When she was beginning her presentation, she mentioned that although they have a lot of the materials on their shelves, or they did, and they were not shelved always in order, because some were on top of each of the shelves. She mentioned that they did have a 65 fill rate, and there was a question about what does that mean. So I'll turn this to Connie to answer that question.
Okay, a 65% fill rate means that our shelves overall are 65% full, meaning there's still room for 35% on the shelves. But this, so that's the overall collection. But in spots, they're full to overflowing. Does that answer your question? You're welcome.
Another question that came in was to both you, Connie, and to you, Brian, about how successful were you with having the interactions with your faculty to review the items that you had targeted for your projects?
Well, our faculty were told that we were going to weed, and we were going to weed in anything that wasn't chosen by them, or chosen by the reference librarian, or vetted by the criteria, would be disposed of. So they really had an interest in coming and looking it over and saving the books that they thought were viable for their discipline, because we might not choose those books. At this point, we've only done, we started on the main floor with the 300s, and we've only done the political science books, so we've only dealt with a couple of faculty at this point, but they were very good about coming and looking them over.
I'd say about the same. The graduate school faculty were absolutely wonderful to work with. They were very eager to look over the items, and like I pointed out in presentation, it was tremendously informative, and it was actually very rewarding. It was very successful.
Okay. Thank you for those questions. Are there any others? I'll give about maybe another 30 seconds to if any more questions come in, and then we will say thank you. Okay. Not hearing any more questions or seeing any more that are statistically that are typed for us. I'll say thank you for coming today. You will be receiving an email that will ask you to complete an evaluation that helps us prepare future presentations, as well as to give feedback for our presenters. And there will be information about the recording of this presentation and where it will be on the CARLI website. So thank you for attending today.